We are here with one of our Browning Associates' former clients, Michelle Jones. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michelle.
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be joining the two of you
Why
today.
don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Absolutely. So I started my career right straight out of college, quite frankly, and got lucky and started in the medical device side. And 38 years later, here I am. And then decided it was time for a change. And that's when I met the Browning Associates and Melissa and got to work with her. And it happened very quickly. I decided it was time to leave the big device company environments. I've been with them for a long time. I've been with Medtronic for a long time, 14 years, and had decided to try to see what else might be out there. And so we explored a lot of different avenues. And through that process, I think one of the most exciting things about that process that allowed for me to explore was what was I passionate about? For so long, I think you get into a situation where you think you're doing everything you love, but when you have the opportunity to take a pause and think about, what do you want to do and what do you still love doing, it was a fun adventure to really think about who I was, what I wanted to do next. And so we started to explore all different types of things. And I think it was that exploration that really helps me tell my story in terms of who I
And
am.
I know you talk a lot about some of the exploration that we did, and we did talk about that quite a bit, what you were passionate about. And even as far as your volunteering is concerned, we talked a lot about that. How much of having those conversations really made a difference in the path that you took?
Networking is a word that I think scares people sometimes, but if you think about the what networking really is, it really is exploring a conversation, and it's really meeting different people. And it was through that process that we were able to, I was personally able to explore things that I hadn't even considered. I was meeting people that were so outside of my comfort zone of industries and ideas that I wouldn't have even considered if I had sat down with a blank sheet of paper and said, gee, what if? And it was kind of through that process that I started to consider really what were the things that I was most passionate about, and put aside the concept of whether it was within the healthcare space or not. What were the fundamental things that were important to me? And I think it was through that experience and through that journey and talking to people that it allowed for me to step away from the actual job or the actual environment of healthcare, whether it's device or pharmaceutical or diagnostic or clinical, and really look at the aspects of the things that I love
Mhm.
to do and be a part of. And that helped me really see what I was bringing to the table with my strengths and what I was really looking
When
for.
you say networking scares people, and I know we've talked a lot about networking, networking is really very different than what most people think it is. And I think in the beginning for you, it was the same. I'm going to call people and ask them about, can they hire me?
Yes.
And how did that make a difference in your conversations once you realized that networking was more about relationship than it was actually about the job? Because when I tell people that, and they get confused as to how that leads to a job. So for you, how did that make a difference?
Yeah, that was uncomfortable and it took some practice. I was starting to talk to people that were so outside of my comfort zone in terms of industry that you couldn't have a discussion about jobs because it wasn't about a job. It was really just about experiences. And once I figured out that it was about the conversation and experiences and having the ability just to open up and first and foremost listen more than talk. It's not about necessarily you picking up the phone and doing all the talking. It's
Right.
about starting a conversation and doing a lot of listening and having a two-way conversation. And once I realized that piece of it more fully, then what happened was I became more excited, I think, about helping others with their careers and their choices and helping them find different ways to accelerate themselves, accelerate their opportunities than I did about myself. And so I think I ended up spending, or found myself spending, more time and getting more excited about doing that, and spent less time worrying about where was I going to find my next opportunity. And lo and behold, when you start doing that and you start having those conversations, it's amazing what can happen. You start to get introduced to people that actually may have an influence, and what direction you may go. And that absolutely happened to me in that manner. And so I think that was the difference for me, Melissa, is that, once you understood that networking wasn't about picking up the phone and finding someone or having that conversation about your job or the next job, but more about the conversation and listening and being able to just build your environment of friendships, if you will, then you can get more comfortable with what that is and how powerful that can be in your own journey of where you're going to go to next.
You found passion in helping other people, and I want to really highlight that when you're networking and you take the approach of seeing how you can help people, that does two things. It builds trust in the relationship, which Melissa and I have spoke about how important building trust is, that foundation. You're building trust with them, but you're also demonstrating your value and your skill by offering advice or help or connecting them to someone else. And as you're demonstrating skill, something's happening in that networking conversation. That person is seeing your credibility, and they're more likely to, pass you off to another individual or an opportunity because you have done that. So it really is a two-way street. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle.
From the time that you signed on, that you decided, you were going to work with Browning, and going through the process, was the experience what you expected? And if it was, fantastic, tell us about that. But if it wasn't, how was it different?
But what was unexpected was how set in our ways we get of seeing ourselves in one dimension or two dimensions in a certain light. And I think what was very unexpected in that first, let's call it, 90 days, that the Browning team, and you in particular, Melissa, but certainly in the processes of what we do, it opened you up to the possibilities that you have to think of yourself in all different aspects. So there were things that we talked about and areas that we highlighted that I hadn't really considered to be that differentiated. And then the networking piece itself, again, I network for a living, so it shouldn't have been difficult, it shouldn't have been scary, but the concept of doing it differently and the concept of meeting people completely outside of what I thought I would be doing, and really challenging myself to expand the breadth of who I should be speaking with, who I should be reaching out to, how I should be building that concept, was different for me and was uncomfortable and a little bit scary, as I said.
And I just want to talk to you a little bit about your experience with connecting with people outside of your industry, because it seems like at first you did have that common assumption that, how can this person help me? They're not in my industry. I don't understand why I'm being connected to this person. So if anyone's listening that has that assumption, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, try it. I think that would be first and foremost, and keep an open mind to the conversation. It's going to not be a normal conversation that you would have within the confines of people in your own industry, but you'd find it remarkably interesting in that the problems, the topics, and the energy is relatively the same. I mean, I talked to people in the oil and gas industry. I talked to people that were exploring, startup organizations with technologies in retail. I talked to people in food, in the food industry. I mean, I had this vast number of conversations, and that was what was remarkable. Is even though different, the topics, the conversation became really comfortable.
For any executive that is contemplating joining up with Browning and running their own campaign, what's some advice that you would give them to give them that extra feeling of confidence to do so?
It's about time to take care of yourself. Most leaders take care of other people first, and they rarely take a moment to really work on themselves. And I would say do that. Do that for yourself. It's worth it. Be open. Be open to listening. Be open to trying something new. Be open to looking at yourself slightly differently and positioning yourself. Try positioning yourself slightly differently. It will be amazing to you to see what additional things might come forward for you in that process. Secondly, I would say it's never too late to contemplate something new. Don't wait until you have to do this. Take some calculated opportunities and think about it differently.